to Something for the Turbo, the new weekly podcast brought to you by Unfound, the global platform for the travel-loving cyclist.
Welcome to the show. We've got another good one for you today. But before we get on to that, I just wanted to say thank you very much to everyone who's been listening. Please do subscribe if you haven't yet. And please, if you're enjoying the shows, tell your cycling mates. Spread the word. We've been growing steadily over the last few weeks, but it'd be great to keep that momentum going. So do pass the pod if you can. Today, I'm joined by Chris Sidwells. Chris is an award-winning author, journalist, cycling journalist who's traveled the world following races and interviewing cyclists for many years now. He's also has a publishing company, Cycling Legends, and he's also Tom Simpson's nephew, which I found out during the conversation, so clearly hadn't done my research. But it's a really interesting conversation. Chris is a fantastic storyteller. He's got some brilliant stories from yesteryear and modern cycling as well. So we hope you enjoy the conversation. And without further ado, here's Chris for you. Chris, thanks for joining me. How are you getting on?
I'm great. We're doing okay. I mean, life's changed a little bit. I'm not going to bike races and I'm not going around knocking on cyclists' doors. Doing what I was doing before, but I'm finding enough to do, and we've got more books that I'm writing, and I've managed to adapt to the current situation, and just like everybody else, trying to live day to day, and have some sort of plan for the future as well.
Yeah, well, whenever we get out the other side of this. So before we sort of crack on talking about what you're doing at the moment, it'd be good to sort of rewind a little bit and find out a little bit more about your sort of background and how you got into being such a prolific cycling writer. But firstly, have you been managing to get out on your bike quite a bit during lockdown?
I am, yes. I must be one of the few people that's lost weight during lockdown. I mean, I spend a lot of time driving. I drive maybe 36,000 miles a year.
Wow.
And eating rubbish.
and is that just for interviewing people, or is that
the last year I've launched my own publishing business, and usually yes, it was interviewing and driving around Europe and everywhere to races, and more because I specialise. My cycling journalism or writing was more to do with interviews and interviewing people or team managers, cyclists, team staff, people like that, rather than at the races. But there was a lot of driving involved with that, and then I've launched my own publishing brand, Cycling Legends, which you can find on www.cyclinglegends.co.uk. And
we'll get that in the show notes.
Yeah, and to get that across to people, you're launching something new in anything. You have to have either a lot of money to take out a lot of advertising, or you take it on the road. So I've been taking the books to cafes, being invited. I've got cafe owners and shop owners to put their shop open for an evening, and village halls, a church, theatres, and we've done these one-man shows telling them about the book and what I'm doing, and then they buy it.
Fantastic. So it's probably been quite nice just to sort of take on, obviously cause some challenges, but just to take your foot off the accelerator literally and have a bit of time at home. Where exactly are you based?
I'm based just at the bottom end of South Yorkshire, right on the South Yorkshire North Nottinghamshire border, near where I was born. I was born in Harworth in North Nottinghamshire, and I've lived in a lot of different places, but I think I've come back like the salmon, either to spawn or die. I'm hoping it's neither.
Well, Yorkshire is such a spectacular part of the world. I absolutely love it. I was up in Harrogate for the Worlds last year, and just the diversity of cycling, it's just a magic place to ride your bike, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I was there at the Worlds most days, did a lot of talks there. And we also, Cycling Legends also does contract publishing, and we, very great feather in our cap, we did the programme for the UCI for Welcome to Yorkshire for the 2019
really?
Road Worlds. Yeah, we did 146 page. It's a magazine, really.
Yeah, I've got it. I've got a copy.
Well, that's ours. That's cycling. You look at the editor, it's Chris Sidwells. That's me and a designer from Sheffield called Mark Etchers put that together. And we were hoping we got lined up programmes and all sorts of things, one-off magazines, but they stopped it. No racing.
Oh, shit. Yeah, of course. Now, tell me, let's rewind a little bit. How have you always loved cycling? How did you get into what you're doing now? Take us back to the beginning.
Well, yeah, I grew up in a cycling family. I'm not giving. Yeah, my uncle was Tom Simpson, so Britain's first.
I didn't know he was your uncle.
Yeah, I don't talk about it much. Yes, I do actually. People who know me, I'll laugh at that. So he grew up in Harworth. My mum was one of the three Simpson children that came down from the northeast. Tom a brother Harry and Reenie, my mum. So they were similar in age. So Tom and my mum were always were very close. And although I can't remember him, I'm not old enough to remember him a lot. I can remember a glimpse. I was 6 when he died. So, but he was a massive influence, and the fact that he was talked about, and where other people, their sport and their fathers and their grandfathers would be talking Georgie Best and Bobby Moore and things like that in the 60s and going into the 70s. All our house was Anquetil and Van Steenbergen. I went to a track meeting at Fallowfield and apparently was sat on Rick Van Steenbergen's knee. Can't remember it. I was 3, 4.
No way.
And I've met a lot of cyclists over the years through that who came to see my grandparents. Gino Bartali actually came to visit. He was in England anyway. He wanted to visit Tom's grave and wanted to meet the family. So that was a hazy memory of being 9 or 10 and him being there with some Scottish friends, actually, Scottish businessmen, as I remember. So, and so I grew up surrounded by cyclists. Wanted to try to emulate Tom, but I was never good enough. I won a few races. I don't think I ever took myself seriously enough as a cyclist.
Yeah, that's interesting. You obviously spent a lot of time with a lot of pros throughout the years, and I'd be quite keen to sort of pick your brains in terms of how you think the sports have evolved and how the pros have evolved. But that's a trait that you've noticed throughout your life, just in terms of how focused and serious everyone takes it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I knew from the start that I knew a lot of kids get into cycling very starry-eyed and they're going to be pros. And I think to myself, do you know what the life's like?
It's a hard life.
Very hard life. It sounds great riding your bike all the time, but you're supposed to produce. There's a lot of pressure on you to produce. And I remember I co-wrote a book with Alan Piper, at Piper's Tale, his autobiography. And he said once time he was in a position where he was really going to be possibly winning a classic. And there was this thing in the back of his mind after wherever he finished. He got caught. I think it was Milan San Remo. And he says there was a bit where he was relieved in a way because he'd seen the world of pressure. You don't get paid the next rung up for what you've won. You get paid for what you're expected to win. So it's pressure. And now it's even more. I think possibly from talking to the riders, they from years ago, they would love the money today, but there is more pressure today. And it is a very, very singular, very strange life. And you can see the effect it's had on them over the years. They come out of it, a lot of them come out of it quite bruised. Some don't. Some come out of it fine because they're level-headed people. But if you're not 100% solid in your mindset, I'm not going to say mentally, but in your mindset, it can be a difficult life, and it can be a difficult life afterwards.
Yeah, I agreed. And you say you didn't want to say mentally, but I think absolutely mentally, I think that it's a very tough sport on a number of levels. But then also I think you see a number of pros struggling with retirement across all professional sports. I think it's quite hard to walk away from everything at really a relatively young age. Yeah,
it is. And of course, there's no, if you leave the forces, there's some sort of 2-week course to try and prepare you for civil life. There's nothing, although I think some of the teams are doing things like that and helping the riders make that transition because it's massive.
Integration back. Well, you've lost your identity almost. You haven't, but that's probably what it must feel like.
Yeah, it is. For a while, I know riders, they've left the scene and they won't watch the Tour de France because they're not there. Something like that. They just won't watch it, and they don't have anything to do with it. A lot don't ride their bike, but they start again when they lose sight of their feet because they put weight on. So.
Yeah, get back into it. It's interesting. I've spoken to, and I mentioned it, spoke to Janto last week and a couple of other people. The pros I've spoken to who have retired, it's quite nice to hear that after a period of time off, they then fall in love with cycling again. But it takes a bit of time, and I'm sure it's different for everyone, but it's not instant for a lot of them.
No, and I think cycling is something you've got to love. You're on your own a lot and you're riding your bike a lot, and it's something you've got to love. And although you might be worn out mentally after being a pro at the top level, it comes back, and that love of the sport never goes away. In Belgium, they call it being having the microbe being infected by cycling.
Yeah.
And it gets in your blood, gets in your system.
It does get in your blood. And it's so hard for people that aren't into it to appreciate that. But so obviously you were born into pretty much British cycling royalty with the family. But so it's obviously been in your blood from day one. But how did you get into sort of following it as a journalist, freelance writer, and then having produced so many books. What was your path?
Well, I went to university. I joined the police force. I was quite successful in the police force for a while, and without going into it, I fell out. Maybe I fell out of love with the police force, and I was in a situation where my wife had a really good. I was getting more and more miserable, and my wife had a really good job. So I was in a situation where I'd done a certain length of time, and I could make a career switch. So I'd always wanted to write about cycling, and she had her own business, so it worked for me for a while. Do what you can. I wrote a book, and that went down well.
So just to interject there, which was your first one?
The first one was Mr. Tom, the original biography I did of my uncle, of Tom.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was going to ask if that was the first one.
The recent Cycling Legends 01 Tom Simpson, the illustrated book of his life, the one that I published myself and I'm currently selling, was published right at the end of 2018. That's sort of everything I've learned since from really getting to know the people, because I've always I got Mr. Tom was, it was good, and I'd spoke to a lot of people. I knew the family. The family was in it, of course. But whenever I met somebody that knew him, I was always wanting to talk about him, because I just, wanted to know more about him and about what made him up. So there's everybody in there. There's comments from his rivals. There's real interviews, interviews with his rivals, with his teammates, with Peter Post, the great six-day rider, and they couldn't stand each other, so he's got a different look at Tom.
Just quickly, Chris, for this book, before we sort of delve into it, I've got a few questions around the book itself. Where can people find it? Where can people buy it?
I have. If you go on that website, cyclinglegends.co.uk, there's a list of stockists on there where it says on the top line, and also you can buy it direct from us.
Excellent. And you ship all around the world?
We ship all around the world. We sent them to Australia last week. America we send over, and Europe. It's done quite well in Europe.
Excellent. That's what I wanted to just double check. So going into the book, obviously you've learned a lot about your uncle since you published the first book. Tell us what you've learned about him sort of personally and his journey in that time. What sort of teasers can you give us?
I learned he was really complicated. You get this idea that he was a very cavalier, he loved fast cars. First thing he ever bought was an Aston Martin. First time he made any kind of money whatsoever. His friend Brian Robinson, who was the senior British pro in his team, San Rafael, said, "You put that money away." And Brian says, "I went away. We were sharing a flat in the Port de Clichy. Tom was a first year pro, and in this flat they had a table, 2 chairs, a fridge, and a bed that they shared. That's all they had." And Brian says, "One day I came home. We'd still got the same furniture, but there was a brand new Aston Martin outside, because that." So you get this idea, but that he was and then he had to sell it, of course, because he had a little bit of a bad time. He loved money. He was charming. He was very, very driven. He was very scientific and controlled in his approach. You get this idea that he attacked a lot, so he won a lot of races because he was always in the break. But Helen, his wife, told me in great detail, how they picked an objective and prepared for it. He had to be 69 kilograms. He knew about power to weight ratio way before.
Really?
Way before.
Time,
yeah. So there was lots of things and lots of funny stories. And I also found out a huge respect that he was held with having, to get to the situation where you speak to a guy like Jan Janssen, Tour de France winner in 1968. And he starts to have tears in his eyes talking about it.
Wow.
And saying that the best times he ever had in cycling were with Tommy, because they used to call him Tommy across there, even though he didn't like it, because the Dutch and Belgians like this Ike, Tommike, like they used to call Tommike Tom Boonen.
Yes.
So it's like
Tommike,
Tommy. And he said, "I had the best times in my cycling career with Tom." And it's a wonderful story. It's a tragic story, because I'm saying it's a wonderful story. It's a terrible story in the end.
It is, yeah.
And he also found out that I also sort of realised that there was a young man here doing something nobody had ever done from Britain, and there was nobody he could trust and nobody could ask for advice. So yes, he made some mistakes, and yes, amphetamines played a part in his life, played a part in his death. But he was out there making decisions that just he wasn't old enough to make. And
he was trailblazing.
yeah,
You think about, obviously we've got some listeners from all around the world, so just maybe we should probably go back a step and sort of, if they're not familiar, I'm sure most people are familiar with him, but he was 29, wasn't he, when he sadly passed, and had achieved so much in the sport. From really, he was the first person from the UK to go and make such an impact on the continent.
Well, literally, possibly the second to ever make a living at it. As become part of the European, the peloton, what we call the pro peloton. Brian Robinson had won he was the pioneer. He'd won 2 stages in the Tour of France in the 50s, and it was a regular part of cycling. Yeah. And then Tom came along, 1959, 21 years old, and finished 4th in the World Professional Road Race Championships, the Elite Road Race Championship. There's only him and Mark Cavendish ever finished higher.
That is amazing. So, Chris, what before he decided to go over to the continent, what was he doing in the domestic scene in the UK? Or it wasn't that evolved then? It was very much based around time trialing, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. I mean, there wasn't many road races. He was winning almost every road race he rode. He had an advisor in England. He met a good coach in England called George Berger, who advised him to stick to the track. He advised him to become a pursuiter, and he won. They got the bronze medal at the 1956 Olympic Games just 2 days past his 19th birthday. But he always wanted. He'd fallen in love with cycling from when he first saw sepia pictures of Fausto Coppi and Gino Bartali in magazines.
Copy, yeah.
Cut them out, put them in scrapbooks. I've got it next to me now on the shelf, his scrapbook. It's all Coppi, not many time trial scenes. And George Burgess said that to be a pro in Europe, they look at the track, they look at pursuiters, the team managers, they look at people who are fast, because cycling evolved by the 50s and races were won with speed rather than just strength, as there had been before.
Yeah.
So he gave himself a deadline of winning the World Amateur Pursuit Championships by the time he was 21. He crashed and couldn't win that in Paris that year in 1958. So he knew he had to go to live in France. So the following Easter, he moved to France and started winning road races in Brittany. By the end of that year, 59, he was 4th in the World Road Race Championships, the elite men's. 60, he had a fantastic year. 61, at 23, he won the Tour of Flanders.
Won Flanders, didn't he? Yeah.
Won Flanders. It's his first attempt. I can't find him in the finishes in 1960, 1961, or the start. And 1961, he won it. Not only that, he was 5th the following year. He was 3rd the year after in Flanders. He won Milan-San Remo. He won Bordeaux-Paris, which is a classic still.
Bordeaux-Paris, yeah, that was a classic then, wasn't it?
Yeah,
that's huge. How long is that?
365 miles all in one go. It dates back to the days when road racing had developed. The first road race was 1868, 1869, and then it was slow to get going. And then by the late 1890s, race organisers were vying with each other to get the most spectacular race. And in those days, what really inspired people was distance. So they were making longer and longer races, and the pro teams were all sponsored. All the sponsors were bike manufacturers. They encouraged the newspapers because they could say that, well, my guys won Bordeaux-Paris on this bike, 365 miles in one go, and it must be the best bike because it's come through this test. Until it came to a peak with the Tour of France, which they were considering doing as a one way round, but they realised that it was far too far. And then stage racing came.
Fantastic. That's such an interesting period. It's funny that obviously his scrapbooks were full of images of Coppi, and really that sort of 60s era now is the era that we all look back with nostalgia, and it's quite a romantic era for cycling. It's a really kick forward as a sport, didn't it?
Yeah, it did, and there was a lot of romance about them, and the top riders you could make good money. Tom did make good money. The top 5 to 10 riders made good money. Eventually, and he'd invested it in all sorts of things that he was going to complete after he'd stopped racing, and he was going to even make more money because the following year, in 1968, he'd signed for an Italian team, Salvarani, which he was going to co-lead with Felice Gimondi, and they doubled his salary. So he'd got everything in front of him as well.
So he was going to leave Peugeot?
He was leaving Peugeot, yeah. Peugeot had never really treated him properly, and they never got totally behind him. Peugeot, even in the 80s, he just asked Sean Yates and Alan Piper, it was a very French team for the French.
Yeah.
So he wasn't happy with Peugeot at all. I mean, although he's made that checkered top iconic, he wanted to get out of Peugeot as soon as he could. And when the Tour of France switched to national teams again in 1967, he could. Peugeot always threatened him that they wouldn't give him couldn't pick him for the Tour unless he signed a contract with them for the following year, and he needed the Tour of France every year. So with it being released, with it going to national teams, he straight away, both big Italian teams, Molteni and Salvarani, were after him, but he signed for Salvarani and had everything to play for.
Oh, it's so tragic. It's such a shame. It would be fascinating to see what he would have achieved in the subsequent years.
Yeah. Yes, well, we don't know. I know that Rick Van Looy. I did all these interviews under the guise of doing things for Cycle Sport, because I would do an interview for Cycle Sport, but I always kept the bit of Simpson back. And Van Looy, who never was very good at giving compliments, and him and Eddy Merckx still hate each other.
Really?
Yeah, they fell out years ago, and. I don't know whether it's actually hate now, but they're not. They're not the best of friends. But he admired Tom, and he said that Tom certainly could have won every classic like he did.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
If he'd have gone on.
That's amazing. So obviously you wrote the first edition of the Tom Simpson book, and then that kind of obviously made an impact, and that sort of opened things up to you to move into. Or did you write another book? Second,
no,
what
happened? What happened next was I met a guy called Luke Edwards Evans, who was editor of. I met him. I made sure I met him. I said, "Can I come and see you?" And went to Croydon, to the headquarters of what was Cycling Weekly, and he took me out for lunch and said, "Yeah, all right, well, try doing this. Write about this and write about that." So I started writing for them, and then for Cycling Weekly, and then when Robert Garbett took over as the editor of Cycle Sport, and the whole thing, Robert and me clicked. And I could always get him if he wanted an interview, if he wanted Eddy Merckx, if he wanted so-and-so, whoever he wanted. He said, get an interview with so-and-so. And I somehow managed to do it.
Brilliant.
And it evolved from there. And it got to the point where Robert would let me go around Europe and put my expenses in, because he knew I wasn't going to take the mickey with them and do anything I wanted to do, really.
Follow the races. So that's amazing. So how long did you do that for? Sort of travel around Europe, follow the races, and
I went and lived in the north of France for a while. We bought a small house over there, and we moved to the north of France. So it could be to get to know everybody. We were there about a year and a bit, and then I'd use that as a base when I went over there, which saved on hotel bills. And but at the same time. That went on until really there was a big restructuring at the company that Cycling Weekly was part of, and there was a big cut in what they put out. So there wasn't the number of magazines anymore. From 5 magazines, it all went down to just Cycling Weekly. But at the same time, you see, I was getting contracts for writing books. DK, I wrote the complete bike book for DK, Dawn and Kindersley. I wrote the bicycle repair book for DK. In those days, I was doing my own contracts, and I'd sign a contract and think, oh, that was nice because they're paying me a nice advance, but not look at the small print of all the other nationalities and reprints and how much you would get for them, which I was getting nothing for. And the cycle repair book has sold nearly over 200,000 copies now in its 6 editions, and we're doing a 7th edition for next year.
Wow.
But I haven't got anything like any kind of return that you would think that should get. But now I got an agent, and it's a little bit better, although not as much. Not really.
Still difficult. Yeah, still written word is difficult, isn't it?
You have to write a lot of stuff to make decent money.
Well, and that was my next point. And you've what is it, 21 books on just a vast array of different cycling topics. That's just fascinating. It's obviously cycling is obviously your passion, and you've got family history in it. But is there anything that you don't know?
No. Well, you can find out, can't you? You always ask, and I do try to check and go all over the place to check. But I never restricted myself to just doing biographies of cyclists, or just doing races, or just doing racing. I've done repair books. I've done travel books. The Tour Climbs was a book that was, we tried to include every big climb that had ever been used in the Tour of France and take a picture of it. That was absolutely fantastic, because they let me, I did that in 3 trips, And I just photograph. I did the photographing myself. Again, I taught myself to do a bit of photography, so that was more attractive to magazines, because instead of having to pay for a journalist and a photographer, I could do my own basic photography as well. So I've done some books with. I mean, they're not as good as photography books, but there were, I think there's a charm to them. I've got some feedback that there was. So I did travel books as well. I've co-written stuff. I wrote the biography of the modern bike with Chris Boardman. I was lucky enough to get the job of doing that. I wrote How to Ride a Bike with Chris Hoy a couple of years ago, which was a great experience.
Yeah, what's he like?
Fantastic. We wrote that in 5 meetings in Buxton, Costa Coffee. There's a little advert for we'd meet in that and discuss things. And I've still got the original sketches he did for weight training exercises and stuff like that. The Stickman. He was a fantastic sprinter, but a very poor drawer.
Very good. And one of your books that I've seen and I love is the Cycling Jerseys book. Yeah.
Yeah, that's sold quite well. And that's gone into 4 different languages, and it was one of the best-selling cycling books in Spain last year.
Really?
Yeah, there's an Italian version, and there is a French version with the foreword by Marc Madio, from the manager of FDJ, who sent me a message that said he very much enjoyed it. And it's not a dry book about jerseys. It's about jerseys and how the cycling jersey evolved over the years, which is an interesting subject. But it's also about some of the great riders who made those jerseys what they
wore them. Yeah, made them so iconic. Yeah. Exactly that, right? Yeah, it's that's the stuff that sticks in your head from when you're younger. For you personally, what obviously there's going to be, I'm sure you're going to say the Tour, but what's your favourite race that you've covered and you've visited?
Oh, I'm a Flanders Classic man. The Tour of France. God, it's so long, isn't it? It's I love.
Have you ever covered the whole thing?
I've not covered the whole thing. I've covered weeks of it. Robert Garbutt had the idea of sending 3 journalists to cover different weeks in a camper van, like the crowds do following a camper van. That was a pretty gruesome. I did 1 week service in that. That was a pretty gruesome, especially with everybody saying I'm not emptying the chemical toilet, and I wasn't emptying it on the grounds that I'd never used it, so I was made sure. I've done. You used to just do a week. I wouldn't want to do the full 3 weeks, because I usually you get sent to do the first week, so I could come back with a load of some features for Cycling Weekly and for Cycle Sport to get it kicked off. I even once interviewed Guy Verhofstadt when he was Prime Minister of Belgium for Cycling Weekly. Yeah, I thought, well, we've not had a Prime Minister ever in Cycling Weekly, and I knew from a mutual friend. Guy Verhofstadt was a student at Ghent University, and I knew from a mutual friend that he was mad on cycling. And he even, to the extent that he trained on the Kutka, the indoor track, Ghent Sports Palace in the winter.
Wow.
And I was able to say, I know a friend of yours called, and he gave me an interview. His bodyguards said, and we got talking.
That's amazing. And how years covering the Tour, how has the sport evolved and developed just through the years that you've covered it?
It was getting it's always been serious. It's always it's a grown-up sport, and it's always been, but it's become, there's certainly more of a distance between the riders and writers now, which some may say that's healthy. I don't know. It's healthy if you want to criticize. It's not healthy if you want to get in-depth stories with people. And the PR people that have come in and got in between cyclists and writers a bit have cut. I think have cut some of the familiarity of it off, and they've tended to be the sort of filter that everything goes through, which is to me not a good. It's not a step forward for readers. Might be a step forward for the pros.
It also makes it harder. You hear Johnny Vortas come out and say that we need more heroes within the sport. We need more personalities for supporters to follow and fall in love with. If you've got that barrier, it makes it harder. When the sport's becoming more professional anyway, it makes it harder to see those personalities, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I think PR people have got to look at creating heroes. And I think some of them do a great job. The the Quick Step guys are really good.
Great
I
on
mean,
there,
I'm a bit more out of it now than I was. Although I would like to develop Cycling Legends as a website, as a more of an online magazine.
Okay.
And I'm not off. I think there's chances for other magazines. I think there's a model of way of doing magazines now that. The old model for me of a magazine supported by trade adverts or adverts is over, and newsstand sales particularly, because they're not doing newsstand sales anymore. Everybody can do their own adverts on social media or their own websites. But I think there's a way of making a quality magazine with low overheads, and I'm looking for investors one day. Maybe that's a little dream.
Well, Chris, I've got a few ideas on this myself, so maybe we should have a follow-up conversation.
Yeah. And I have spoken to people who are interested in this. It's the same way that we did. We're able to produce Cycling Edge at a reasonable. There's no adverts or anything. There's nobody backing it. We were able to put a really quality stuff thing together for the World Championships, for the UCI World Championships, and we're well under all the other program manufacturers.
Yeah.
So there is a way of doing it, but I'm not going to reveal it over the.
We'll chat offline. I've got a couple of ideas as well. But anyway, going back to cycling the sport, obviously you've seen the evolution. It's become far bigger here in the UK, far bigger following. Given the structure of cycling, do you have any views in terms of, with this period of lockdown, how the sport can come out the other side from a structural perspective, from a financial perspective? Its viability?
It's difficult, isn't it? I mean, I'm not looking too far in the future. You can't. Yes, we've got to come through this, like we come through everything. But to me, it's a political thing or biological thing. Now we've got to have a vaccine. Yeah. Well, a vaccine's a game changer, isn't it? Everything could go back to as it was.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't know enough about epidemiology or disease transference, but to me, that's the answer. And if there's a vaccine for other things, there has to be for this. And governments around the world, I don't know whether they are doing or not doing, they should be putting every bit of money they can at the moment to curing this problem. And then we can get on together and cure other problems and save cycling. But going forward, it's a bit gloomy at the moment, that looking forward. Whether the Tour of France will take place, I don't know. Does the Tour of France want to be the vehicle that brings it back or spreads it? That's a fear.
That's the fear, isn't it? Yeah, the potential risk of that. I mean, I've mentioned on this pod before, I think if the Tour does go ahead, it could be a fascinating spectacle, given there hasn't been any racing, and theoretically everyone should be fresh and raring to go. It could be a really interesting addition.
Although they've done that much on Zwift, I'm worried that they're going to crash at the first corner. And everybody's flying fit as well. They're going to be. I mean, guys are riding 12 hours in a day. I know. And they're going to be itching to go. It's quite a dangerous situation, actually. I would have thought testosterone and being deprived and cooped up. It's
well, that's it. I think week one of the Tour is always a bit twitchy and crash ridden. So it could quite feisty the first week, I imagine.
Yeah, but I have not got an answer to this. There's greater brains than me on what the future of cycling is. I mean, there is going to be a future. The sport of cycling. Conversely, on the other side, cycling's got a huge role to play in people's everyday lives.
Yes.
And if the cities and not just our government, we'll not get too political, but it's the cities that are doing this. They've just revealed the active transport plan for South Yorkshire, and it's inspired. I could go and do business in Sheffield, Barnsley and Doncaster, my big 3 South Yorkshire cities and towns, without hardly crossing a road when this is finished, really? Which is fantastic. It's nirvana. And I'm writing a book now about safe cycling in the city, and the research is that most people's urban journeys are 2.5 miles, and they are doable on a bike, so long as there is the structure to make people feel safe, which is the big barrier.
Is that first journey, isn't it? It's getting everyone to take that first journey, and I think everyone has a part to play in that, current cyclists and car drivers. But you're right. I think so many journeys are under, is it 2.5 miles, did you say?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Urban journeys, not from out of town into town, but journeys when you're in a town or a city.
Across the town. That'd be great if we can see a real cultural shift around the bicycle. I mean, I've seen it out on the bikes out on the bike around here. Just I love all the old bikes I haven't seen since sort of mid-90s that have been pulled out of sheds, and people on those, and it's just brilliant to see, and couples of all ages riding, families riding. If we could sort of push that, that would be a fantastic achievement out the back of this crazy period.
Yes, there would be. As Dame Sarah Story, it was one of the figureheads for the South Yorkshire plan, said, this has been a terrible thing, but something good could come out of it, and something that would help change the nation's health. We might get back to where children were like when I was young, when you could have sugar when I was young because you burnt it off.
Yeah, you got out and exercised and... Yeah, exactly that. And it's funny how we've moved away from it. I don't know if you heard an episode I launched last week with Shannon Buffton in Beijing, just talking about the historical cycling culture within Beijing as a city. Everyone used to cycle everywhere, and they kind of lost that way a little bit, although it's starting to come back again. And I think there are lessons to be learned all around the world where it is a key mode of transport and it is embraced. And I just hope that the car drivers, certainly I feel that cars are driving a bit faster with the quieter roads, or they certainly were. So hopefully it's just that awareness. It's education and awareness, really, isn't it?
It's education and awareness. And also remember, every time you get a car driver on a bike, he becomes a cyclist as well. So you can always tell. There's a joke about how close passing, isn't it? A metre and a half is the close pass is close. A metre and a half is respect, because that's what they've seen you and respect you. If they go over the other side of the road, they're a cyclist.
Yeah, exactly. That's so true. It's so true.
Because they realise, and the more there is buzz, the less there is of them. So I think once you are a cyclist and you've had a few close passes, and you suddenly are aware of cyclists. And the big thing, what I say about road safety, and it's in my book, is work with people, eye contact, and when you are in traffic, be definite. Don't wobble, don't stay to one side. If you need to turn right, indicate, signal, move. Because car drivers can cope with that. They can cope with somebody who's definite. They might not like it, but they can cope with it.
Well, you've got to you're a vehicle on the road ultimately, and you need to act that way. And that's the confidence piece. It's that you need to find that weird sweet spot. It's those that are not confident enough I worry about, and then at the other end of the spectrum, it's those that are overconfident.
Yes,
you've got to find the middle ground. And when you wrote the book with Chris Boardman, did you discuss this topic with him at all? Because he's doing some fantastic things, particularly in Manchester, around addressing bikes on the road, isn't he?
Yes, a little bit, yeah. And he's a fantastic thing. I mean, God, Chris Boardman should be Prime Minister. He should really go for Parliament, because he's so he's so well read. He seems to remember everything he's ever read. And there's nobody better at putting across. I mean, it's quite frightening. I'm supposed to be a journalist. I'm supposed to be a writer and be able to put something across. Chris can put things across. He gets right to the point straight away. He's not afraid to state his mind. He's always got reasoned arguments. I love the story when he was given Project Bradley, when they had Bradley Wiggins as a young lad who was potential Olympic gold medalist, but you just couldn't make him produce. And he got Brad Wiggins to put everything down on paper, and he was going to take him from where he was now to an Olympic gold medal. And he went through his homework, crossed it all out with a red pen.
Oh, really?
Because it wasn't. And for a while, Brad Wiggins says this, I hated him. Every time I sent this thing in, he'd come back with all these comments. And Chris Boardman says now that I wondered if I was putting him off. But it worked. He got him to line up all his thoughts. And Chris's thoughts are so lined up. And he's not afraid to take a stance like he does with helmets. He's got a reason. People saying, helmets should be compulsory. It's a diversion from the true thing about road safety, which is separating cyclists off from other road users. And he states that, and he argues with cyclists. He'll argue, and you can't. There's no chink in what his argument is. He's took that from his cycling career. He's took that from it's run it through his secret squirrels when he was working for British Cycling and getting the latest things together. He took it into his own business. He formed what the Boardman brand was going to be without waver, and he did it. And I've got tremendous admiration for him.
Yeah, I know. I think he's a great guy. Obviously, for me, on a personal level, Barcelona '92 was where I first noticed him on that Lotus bike, and then his subsequent move across the Tour de France. That's how I fell in love with cycling. Was down to one man, really. I was sort of nine, 10-year-old, 11-year-old boy. And it was an amazing journey, those sort of mid-90s and him in the Tour.
But then he's so modest, he will say that it would never have been a pro rider if he'd had to do it the same way as Tom Simpson and Barry Hoban did and Sean Yates before, and gone to France and had to come through the French amateur road system, because he said he had this one thing, this one quality that he used to perfection and wrang the neck of it, of being able to ride a time trial so precisely, especially the prologue ones. And his career came at a time when winning any stage at the Tour de France, if you'd won the prologue before, you certainly weren't set for life. But you won the prologue in 1992, 93, and you were in that age group, any stage of the Tour de France. The Tour de France has become bigger than anything before, because in the 60s, a stage winning the Tour de France didn't necessarily guarantee future success or even a contract for the following year. It was one of many other races, and now it was preeminent, and he was able to exploit his talent and be the first of a revival, and it all led on what he learned. He put into British cycling. It all helped to build what we have now.
Well, he opened the gateways, really, didn't he? It was
And you could see this. You could see this. It used to. It snowballed when Brad Wiggins started to have success. You was speaking to juniors who would say, "I used to do those rides for Cycling Weekly. A ride with one a week. We used to pick a cyclist and say, well, take us on your favourite training ride on a rest day." And there was kids like Adam Blythe and Matt Rowe, Luke Rowe, in it really when they were, I first did them when they were 17-year-olds, they were saying, I want to win Tour of Flanders. I want to win Paris-Roubaix. Now, but it hasn't happened for Adam, but Luke Rowe's got a Paris-Roubaix possibly in him. But they were saying that then, whereas a junior from 10 years before wouldn't have dared say that.
No, exactly. It's that belief, isn't it? Yes. And it's really interesting. I listened to a rugby podcast at the weekend, and they were talking about the structure of how you fund sport, and they were basically comparing the RFU putting a huge amount of money into developing grassroots rugby, whereas in New Zealand they just they put most of the money into the All Blacks. Mm-hmm. And it's that, to your point, it's that they get a far better grassroots rugby take up. But when their men's team's successful, is that, and their women's team's successful, it's that inspiration. So when you see riders like, all the successful riders, that encourages more people to get out on their bikes. And
I think that's the way to do it. I think it should be top loaded, because it's no good spending lots of money on the juniors. They need some support and some help now and again, but you've got to give the good bikes as they go on. It's always something to strive for. People can't achieve until it takes a very singular person to achieve something that nobody else has. Yeah. You've got to have complete self-belief and a real drive. Once somebody else has achieved it, once Brad Wiggins has won the Tour of France, British Grand Tour wins. It's 10 now, isn't there? Yeah. I mean, 10 years ago, not 10 years ago, where are we now? 10 years ago, you were talking talk to pros like Barry Hoban, and he won't mind me saying this because he'd be the first to congratulate Dave Brailsford and all that's been done, would say Team Sky, and they're going to win the Tour of France in 5 years. I can't see it. Who's going to win it? I can't see it.
Can't see it happening.
And it did. It took Brad to win it, and then the door opened.
Yeah. It's been an amazing decade, I suppose, for British cycling.
They can't win monuments, though, can they?
Yeah. What's your view on that? I suppose there's more variables. It's harder to manage, maybe?
I mean, it's not something you can break down into stage. I mean, David Brailsford and the whole project of cycling is you started with the track because it's physics, isn't it? If you put this amount of power in and your CD, your aerodynamic profile is only such and such, you will go at this speed. Yeah. And then you can do that with the Tour de France, because if you put that amount of power, you only weigh this much, you climb at such and such a rate. And if that rate, if so many VAM, is your vertical ascended meters, is whatever an hour, you'll win the Tour de France. As long as you stay out of trouble and you've got a good team that studies you. There's more variables than that. But this is why I love it. We're going back to this one-day racing. The classics are a proper old bike race. Gloves off. Yeah. Anything happens. Anything can happen. Any tactic. your Tour de France is simply a staged Grand Tour now. Is the number one tactic is don't lose it.
Yeah.
You
You can
don't
manage
try
it
anything
with
that
the
loses
timing.
it. Yeah, manage your losses and then exploit your. Bradley Wiggins did it perfect. He managed the mountains, and he was lucky there was 2 long time trials that year.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what they're doing. Calculate it. You can calculate food and stuff like that. But classics are old fashioned bike racing. There's somebody says go, and at the end of the day, you've got a winner, and anything happens in between. And
So a lot of hard scrap.
yeah, Ineos and Sky have always tried to control them, and you'll hear the whole class. I've watched them with Barry Hoban. He's going, "Why are Sky riding? Why are Sky riding? Just wait, just ghost, just let Quick Step ride, let so and so ride."
Well, talking about Quick Step, I mean, just sensationally successful in the one-day races. Conversely, how do they do it?
It is. I mean, it's their goal, isn't it? And you have to be a Belgian. If a Belgian kid, if you was talking to somebody about asking a cyclist, they'll be asking them if they've done the Tour of Flanders rather than the Tour of France. Yeah. So they are their be-all and end-all.
It's their DNA. I suppose a little bit like the All Blacks, I suppose.
Yeah, and they know how to win them. And they've got. I mean, De Koenig. It's not Quick Step anymore. It's De Koenig. Must have 5 riders who could win Flanders or Roubaix.
Sensational talent within that team. It's unbelievable.
And that's how you do it. But they know how to win them, and they use they use they use those tactics best, and they use their strengths, and they just know their way around those races.
They do. They put themselves in the right position, and they, to coin Matthew Hayman's famous quote, they just keep riding, don't they?
Yeah. I mean, they never break. That's what Lefebvre says. He said that about Tom Boonen. Tom Boonen, he might bend, but he never breaks.
Yeah, amazing. And we might have some autumn classics this year with the revised calendar. That could be quite fun with the weather.
Yeah, it could. I don't know when they're going to be. It'll seem strange, and it'll seem strange that everything gets back to normal. But I'm all for change, and it's going to be interesting. It may be different in that because the season does tend to peter out a little bit, doesn't it? The World Championships have been a little bit devalued, in my opinion, by making them a bit later.
You think so?
I think so, a little bit, yeah. I think it's because people are really having to extend a year for it. To me, it's not so much they've been devalued. To me, the Tour of France has become all-consuming. And it's so big that it sucks everything in from cycling, and it drains people. And I think the other Grand Tours are a little bit getting the same way. But that's evolution. It's evolving. It's what people must want because... people these things don't become great by accident, do they?
Yeah, it's yeah.
So but it'd be nice to see. Well, I don't know whether we're going to get a Lombardy, but I mean that's just an absolutely special race, isn't it?
Yeah, magic race. Yeah, I suppose Lombardy could be in its original slot potentially.
Yeah,
that's all confusing.
It is very confusing.
They haven't moved the date, have they?
No, they haven't moved the date. They don't need to yet. I don't think so. We'll see. But. It's evolution. This is cycling as it is now, and it's very popular. There's thousands, millions of people out on the road. So whatever they're doing is the right thing to do at the moment. Yeah,
definitely, something's going right. So long may that continue. And it's I see lots of cycling businesses are absolutely thriving.
Yeah, I mean that's from. I mean you if you're in the cycle trade now, you really should be making money because the fact that people wanting bikes, there isn't enough bikes to go around at the moment. So bike shops have had a big shot in the arm, and so have family-run businesses, which have really sometimes have struggled. It's been great for them because these new cyclists that are going to come in need these local shops and local family business because there's very often a wealth of hard-won knowledge in them, and they know how to keep a customer as well, so they will look after you. So I'd encourage anybody to support your local bike shop.
Support your local bike shop. Support local generally, and I think with a bit of time to reflect, given the lockdown situation, it makes you appreciate just the added value you get from local businesses that you can't necessarily put a monetary value on.
Yeah, to me, the future of the whole world is that we can not need to travel in the same way we were. The Zoom. I mean, I've just discovered Zoom interviews, Skype interviews. I'm still interviewing cyclists, but we do it on Skype. It's great. And it's much easier. It's nice to see people. It's nice to be in their presence. But, if we can cut down on the number of journeys. I got to a point once when I was on a plane every week, which isn't that's a waste,
Not
isn't it?
sustainable. It's not healthy
It's not
either. It's
healthy.
not healthy for the planet.
No.
Yeah, I think we kind of opened this Pandora's box of globalization, and everything sort of went in one direction. And maybe this is a chance to sort of have a look at that and find a bit of equilibrium and a better balance.
Yeah, and the bike's got a
It'll
great
help
place to play.
Sorry, Chris.
Sorry, and the bike's got a big part to play in that.
Yeah, let's hope so. Where's your favourite place in the world to ride?
I do love it. I love it in Provence. I love Tuscany. I like Belgium. I like Belgium because I love these gritty places. I come from mining villages, and I'm quite attracted to places where all heavy industries died, but where there's still steel mills and stuff like that. And I like the Ardennes. So I'm very gregarious. I just love to ride my bike. I actually like the feeling of riding a bike. Jean Bobet, great author, was a good cyclist, won Paris-Nice, great author. Louison's brother, and Louison won 3 Tour de France. He describes the act of cycling as voluptuous, which I think it's like a warm bath. It just once you've got a little bit of fitness, and I think that I look back to my own racing. I used to be on the way to races and thinking, what's down that road and what's there, and it was almost like a good ride spoilt. That you've got all these people bothering that you've got to try and compete with and keep up with. I just love riding a bike. It's glorious. I hope I can keep continuing doing it for. I've got a friend who's in his 80s and he rides 100 miles every Thursday and every Sunday.
Wow.
And 4 times a year, he's not doing it at the moment, he rides from Wetherby to Whitby and back for fish and chips.
That's utterly inspirational. And I think you're right. There's no better way to see the world on the bike. And hopefully, all these new people on the bike are learning that now, which is amazing. And with e-bikes as well, there's a future there that can get people cycling who thought it wasn't possible or they just weren't able to. And that's a whole nother market potentially opening up.
Oh, yeah. I mean, e-bikes are selling well, and I think they're a great boon to cycling. E-bikes, one of the things I've said in this book I'm writing, are great for short journeys around cities. E-bikes are also, because one of the big problems, let's face it, one of the big problems of riding a bike is you're going to work on it, you get a bit sweaty, or if you're riding longer, you might have to get some special equipment. But e-bikes, you can just have your normal clothes on, hop on the bike, little journey. The electric motor helps you. And you're still moving your legs. You're still putting some effort in as well. You're still burning the calories. And you're more likely to burn more because you're more likely to ride further. And I can see nothing but positive. And it's fantastic as well on the other end of the spectrum where you've got pro riders. I went to a presentation last year where Ribble gave Brian Robinson an e-bike because he's 89 now. He's going to be 90 soon.
Wow.
And he wasn't riding his bike as well. He lives in West Yorkshire, so it's hilly. And they gave him this bike. And a week later, I saw him at Velo Retro in Cumbria, where he was a guest of honour. And his brother-in-law his son-in-law was complaining that he says, he's turning this motor on when we get up to a climb, going up the hill at 10 miles an hour in the Lake District. So, and he was like a kid, 89-year-old kid. His eyes were shining.
Brilliant.
And he said, it's going to keep me riding for another 10 years, this. Which is beautiful.
Absolutely. Isn't that so great? Yeah, exactly. And I have, hopefully I can ride well into my autumn years with the kids as well, with the help of an e-bike. So yeah, that's
brilliant.
Fantastic.
And Eddy Merckx has got one, but don't tell anybody.
Has he really?
Yeah. A secret between us.
Yeah, there's a secret between us. And have you spoken to him about it? Does he love it?
My cousin did. He told my cousin he'd got one of those secret ones that Tom's daughter. He told her that he said because he goes around the world. People want to go for a ride with Eddy Merckx. He says, but they don't realise how old I am. And he says they think, la course en tête. He says they leave me at the front and then just change positions.
Riding 60k every day.
He says, I've had operations. My heart's a bit strange. So he says, I've had a little bit of help. And I think it's one of those secret ones that the Belgian girl was thrown out of cyclocross.
Oh, really? You can't even, a hidden motor, even better.
This was a couple of years ago. Maybe he's more open about it now.
Yeah, well, I think he could get away with it. He's what an athlete he was, hey?
Oh, fantastic. And one of the, I mean, if you asked me what one of the most memorable interviews I ever did was, I've done a couple now, but one I spent a whole morning with him, and it was just amazing finding out about him and finding out. He said some one thing that's always stuck with me. I always ask naive questions, because I am a bit in awe of these guys, even at my age, because of what they could do. You know, I mean, what did he? You know, he won the Tour of France by 20 minutes. He
still gets me that.
Yeah, well, yeah, and he was 12 minutes in front, and then he got another 12 minutes just like that. And I says, "Well, why did you do that?" He said, "Well, because I could." I was just so strong, and I thought, well, I'm going. He'd also, his teammate had pissed him off as well, so he wanted to teach him a lesson. But I said to him, "What's it like being Eddy Merckx?" Meaning, you know, you've done everything that everybody would ever want to do. And he says, "It's very strange. I go around the world, and I'm confronted with a young man I've got nothing in common with. You know, this man I was." He says, "And everybody wants me to ask me about him, but nobody asks about me now, and I'm a completely different person."
Wow, that's quite sad.
Takes us round to that sadness and that difficulty with retiring.
Yeah.
I'm not sorry for him, because he's made a lot of money.
Yeah, I know, but that's.
But it is it takes you back. It takes you're taken aback by that, and you see that, yes, it must be a weird life, because you were constantly confronted with this young man. The rest of us aren't. Nobody remembers what I was like when I was 30.
Well, we've got some exciting young talent coming through as well, haven't we? With Van der Poel and Remco and these guys coming through. It's going to be a fascinating.
One thing as well, they are very much grounded. One thing I'm always impressed about cyclists, young cyclists, is they know their cycling history. Maybe because it is a family thing. I mean, if you think of Mathieu van der Poel's lineage, his dad Adri and grandfather Raymond Poulidor, he was brought in. I don't know. I've not met Remco Evenepoel, so I don't know what he knows about it. And he was a footballer first, wasn't he? But they tend to find out about it. There's a big body of literature, I suppose, to read, and they're aware of the past of the races. That's why they want to win these big races, because they're aware of the past of them.
Yeah.
And Matthew's very old. I was reminded of, he's very old school. There was a couple of years ago in the Coxada cyclocross. This impressed me. And it tells you what being a pro was cancelled because of high winds. So it was, a dreadful day, and everybody else would be, keep warm and go home and live to fight another day, and we'll start training tomorrow. He rode back to Holland, to just across the border from the Belgian coast over the north of Antwerp and in just south of the north of the Belgian border where they live. 220 kilometres in November, because he hadn't got his cyclocross. And that's the kind of dedication and also love of cycling and enthusiasm that you've got to have.
Loves it, but so driven. Knows what it takes with the family connections, I suppose.
Yeah. Or perhaps his dad made him.
Yeah. You're not getting in the car, son. You can cycle home. Yeah,
I can believe that.
Very good. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon to join us. It's been quite a fascinating discussion. We will make sure that we get the websites in the show notes so people can find it. And if we're okay to share your email as well, if anyone's got any questions they want to pose to you or anything like that, or you want Chris for speaking engagements or the like.
Yes,
we can
I've got quite a few club dinners if they happen, and whatever, and cafes when we. There is going to be a Cycling Legends 2. Tom Simpson illustrated book was. I also got to say there was 50 pictures in that book. It was 167 pictures altogether. 50 pictures just of Tom has never been published before. So it's worth buying it for that. It's only 20 quid. And there will be a Cycling Legends 02, and I'm not revealing the title of that, but it's different, very special. Again, the whole thing of Cycling Legends, my principle, is to tell the real story. Not have any kind of filter, not trying to prove anything. We're not trying to do anything. We're just telling the story. It'll always be told by the people who were there and did it. I don't like writing where it goes in through a filter of the writer and they present it in a way that they see in their mind that's a structure. I only like to write about. My writing's always got a lot of quotes in it because it's always got to be the people who were there and seeing it. They're the people whose opinion and accounts matter. It'll always be the unpublished picture if we can. It's so easy to just go to Press Sports and all these big reserves and put this picture in your mate. So you end up seeing the same picture of Eddy Merckx 20 times. I'm trying not to do that. Obviously, you've got to use some photo agencies. But I just want it to be that bit special and go to the nth degree to make a really good product.
And the Cycling Legends 2 yet to be announced, but when can we expect an announcement on that?
Well, I'm hoping it's going to be out by the end of this year. So we'll expect an announcement sort of when I know it's going to be there, and I know when we're going to get it out, and I know when I'm going to be able to take it down the road. So hopefully by August we can.
Will you let us know? We can let everyone know on the hub.
We've got a couple of other. We do standard books as well, and we've got a couple of other. We've got at least one title that will be coming out this year, and then possibly 2 more next year.
Excellent. Well, yeah, do let us know so I can be aware whether I need to put it on my Christmas list or not.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. As you can see, I keep rattling on. I love talking about bikes. And
no, it's fascinating. I reckon we could speak all day. In fact, I'd love to get you back on in the not too distant future. We could maybe speak about the book that's about to be launched.
Okay, yeah, and I do have a regular cycling show on it. I know it's a rival podcast to you. Do you mind if just Velocast?
No, please share away.
Yeah, Velocast is the podcast I have my own show on at once a month, and we also do an interview show. And we've had Alan Piper and Barry Hoban on that. I've only been doing it this year for a few months now, but I love it. I think podcasting's great. I mean, it's another way of getting cycling across there. I really enjoyed it.
I've been thoroughly enjoying doing these, and I've just loved speaking to so many different people, different backgrounds, all connected with cycling. It's been fantastic. So I'll get the Velocast link from you, and we'll also put that in the show notes so people can find it along with Cycling Legends and your own personal website as well.
Thank you very much. Brilliant. Lovely to talk to you.
You're a gentleman, Chris. Really good to chat. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for listening. Please subscribe to the podcast. And more importantly, don't forget to download the Unfound app and join cyclists from around the world on the hub. We'll see you on there.